for being patient, that moment of informality. We shared that moment with you. I can't tell you how absolutely delighted I am to see all of you, to have the museum back again to its former shape and in terms of, bringing in the public and engaging with the public. And as you know, all of you know, we have been closed for the last year, little more than a year, because we had an unfortunate incident due to COVID. We weren't able to keep up the regular maintenance of the museum. And so we had parts of the roof come down, and that was a little bit of a serious thing. We had to close it because, of course, we don't want any part of the roof coming on you. And it's taken a while because we are working with the municipal corporation to do the repair, and these sort of things take time, as you know. So we're delighted, but we've now managed to clean up the back space, and we're going to open this whole area, which is the plaza, which includes this education center, the museum shop, the small special project space, which will host exhibitions. And we have an exhibition on the 8th of December. We have TV Santosh, so I hope all of you will come back again for the opening. And so, yes, so it's just a great pleasure to have all of you with us again. And of course, what better way than to have a seminar of this kind, the Triennale, to host the Indian Triennale seminar, and also some of our esteemed international guests from London, acclaimed potters who are here and who we will be hearing from. I actually went to the Triennale in Jaipur when it was, what date was it? 2018. And I can't tell you how, what an incredible experience it was to see the variety, the creativity, the intelligence with which it was presented, and it was a very large Triennale, and I think you're going to announce the artists for the next edition today. And so it's really an honor for us to be a part of it. And it's very important because for the longest time, as all of you know, fine arts and crafts was differentiated, and fine arts, as you know, during the Enlightenment and even earlier, was considered the acme, painting and sculpture, and history painting was, of course, the top of the lot. And then that whole tradition was revised when it came to the Americans and Clement Greenberg, who created another kind of ideology about what was important and how painting had to constantly renew itself, and it had to reinvent itself in a sense. And in that whole discourse, crafts was completely left out. So I think what we are, and that was never the case with India. With India, it was integrated. Craft, art, fine arts was all part of one larger visual representation of the world. I have to say, it wasn't given the kind of status that art was given, fine arts was given in Europe and in America during even prior to the colonial period. But the silos that were created during the colonial period, very defined silos between craftsmanship and fine arts, has, of course, started to break down with a lot of post-colonial discourse. And what the Triennale represents, in a sense, is that breaking down of those silos and a more holistic approach to what art is and what fine arts is. And so we're delighted to be part of that discourse and to start it. And so with that, I would like to welcome Asad, who has been very generous and has kindly supported the Triennale to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasneem, for that delightful welcome address and for setting the perfect tone for this special curtain raiser, which also marks the first long-awaited collaboration with the Dr. Bhau Daji Lad Museum and Avid Learning. So thank you. Good evening, everyone. Avid Learning's curatorial philosophy revolves around the curation and presentation of symposiums and multi-stakeholder events, much like this, that contributes to the overall enrichment of the arts and culture community. Throughout this year, we've collaborated with the Ministry of Culture, showcasing a diverse range of events in celebration of India's G20 presidency, from the International Museum Expo in May to the Festival of Libraries in August, spotlighting India's cultural richness. Next month, Avid Learning will also be a knowledge partner for the inaugural India Art, Architecture and Design Biennale at the iconic Red Fort in the city's capital. Also in December, driven by our fundamental belief in the transformative power of the arts and culture in driving social change, Avid Learning will be taking its advocacy efforts internationally to participate at the global stage of COP28 UAE, United Nations Climate Change Conference in Dubai. But now to the task at hand, this evening's special event, Evolving Clay Practices, a Prelude to Common Ground, the Indian Ceramics Triennale 2024. Life is just like a potter's clay. It gets shaped by our very own hands. I found this quote and I thought it was a wonderful way to start this conversation. In the skilled hands of an artist, clay becomes a medium of infinite creativity, a canvas to express thoughts and emotions. The process of working with clay reflects life's journey, a delicate balance of control, engagement, and ultimately surrendering to transformation. It is a journey that bridges the past, present, and the future through the power of art, history, and culture. The origins and traditions of ceramic art in India boasts an ancient and a rich heritage deeply embedded in culture and tradition. The earliest specimens can be traced back to the Harappan civilization, where ceramics went beyond the utilitarian purposes, transforming into means of artistic expression. Starting with ancient terracotta figurines and extending to the allure of beautifully glazed pottery, the trajectory of the ceramic art in India narrates a tale of inventiveness and a response mirrored to transitions of eras. Even today, pottery and ceramic craftsmanship mirrors the country's much celebrated diversity with distinct pottery styles shaped by local culture, resources, and techniques. A US Vogue article of 2017 declared pottery as the new yoga because of its noteworthy meditative qualities. But as we move on from the contemplative nature of pottery to the individuals and collaborators who made this possible, I'd like to thank our partners and all the participating artists and speakers, without whom this spectacular evening and the Triennale would not have been possible. A special thank you to Madhvi Subrahmanian, Anjani, Khanna, and Sharbani, the co-curators of the Indian Ceramic Triennale 2024 and the entire team. But before I conclude, I'd like to re-invite Tasneem Zakaria Mehta back, who will take you through the rich history of the Bombay School of Pottery, providing a historical background of ceramics made in Bombay in the late 19th century. Thank you all for joining us. I decided to keep it short because there are many interesting artists in the room, and I assume you'd rather hear from them than me. But thank you for being here.
So, one of the most important collections in the holdings of the Dr. Bhau Daji Lad Museum, the erstwhile Victoria and Albert Museum, which you see here, which all of you, I think, of course, know and have visited, I hope, many times, is of the Bombay School or Wonderland Pottery, developed at the Sir J.J. School of Art from the 1860s, which continued intermittently till the mid-1920s, hugely popular as artwares sold at the various international exhibitions held regularly at several cities across Europe, America, Australia, and India. The production of this pottery was barely able to keep up with its demand. Started as an experiment in production and design for commercial purposes, the art form was adopted by the school and eventually became one of the most important scientific and technical design experiments to be carried out by the colonial administration. A variety of shapes and styles were amalgamated to create a distinctive art form that influenced how Indian design was perceived in the West. Interestingly, however, the experiment did not achieve its original purpose, to educate native potters in designs and techniques and establish a flourishing output of art pottery for commercial purposes. This paper examines the history of this experiment and interrogates the reasons for its success and eventual failure. In the process, it explores the colonial administration's biases and prejudices about Indian design and Indian craftspeople, and the deep ideological and ontological conflict at the heart of art and design education in India. And you know, this is something terribly important because it still continues in a way even today. So let me just quickly take, this is of course, as you know, the museum. This is the restored museum. I think most of you know that we went through a restoration from 2003 to 2008. This was the before and after. Just quickly to share these images, with any of you who haven't seen this before and can understand the tremendous transformation that took place. And here you see Bombay pottery being restored. All the pots, like many of the other objects, were in a very bad condition. And this is one of our most photographed and most famous pots. And here is the pottery section, right as you enter the museum, because it is one of the most important collections that we have. And here you see, this is the George C. Clark pot. And here are some of the other pots in our collection. And here are some plates. And here are some tiles. And I'm just going to read to you a little more and then come back to the presentation. 1851 marked an important shift in how India was perceived by the world. For the first time, a comprehensive display of Indian arts and crafts was showcased at the Great Exhibition of the Works of Industries of All Nations in London. Intended to stimulate trade and create an appetite for new products, the exhibition was an outstanding success. In Bombay, preparations for the exhibition started about 1848, when colonial officials were instructed to collect all that was rare and representative of their region, including artistic products as well as natural history specimens. And this is very much what the early collection of the museum was about. However, it soon became apparent that the production of artwares was ad hoc. Artwares in inverted commas, was ad hoc, and expertise was family-based. The village potter, according to various colonial administrators' accounts, would travel with his wheel from village to village, using local clay and making pots as required. The lack of an organized industry, therefore, impeded the progressive development of pottery as an art form. In Europe, the art had been perfected by Meissen and at other regional centers. Britain had only lately joined this hallowed club with the establishment of Wedgwood and the Staffordshire potteries. Keen to develop porcelain and pottery in India for commercial purposes, the School of Art, under George Wilkins Terry, made a concerted effort to establish the pottery department as part of its focus on Indian craftsmanship and design. Colonial officials were of the opinion that if India was to compete in the international trade of artware manufacture, or industrial arts as it was called at the time, the craftspeople would need to be organized and educated about production techniques and designs. The Sir J.J. School of Art was established, which you see here on your left, and of course that's the museum. Whereas the Sir J.J. School of Art was established towards this end in 1857 by Sir Jamshed Jejeebhoy, the preeminent merchant prince of Bombay, who was a member of the selection committee for the 1851 exhibition. He was so impressed with the enthusiastic response to the Indian section of the exhibition that he was persuaded to set up the school with a donation of the princely sum of 100,000 rupees at the time. The school would address the deeply felt lacuna and would be for the improvement of arts and manufacturers and the habits of industry of the middle and lower classes, he stated. Under the proper guidance, and I quote, the people of India would attain a degree of proficiency in painting and sculpture which would lead to an extended taste for such objects and would enable India once more to take up an advanced position among the manufacturing countries of the world. I hope you see the dichotomy in that statement. It was fine arts, and yet it was going to be manufacturing that would bring India to the top. Originally, the V&A Bombay was to be situated next to the school on the Esplanade, which is where the school is located right now, and that's what the area was called during the colonial period. So it could showcase the best objects produced by the school and instruct taste in design, as well as encourage manufacture of the industrial arts. Because it was assumed that all the merchants and the craftspeople would come to the museum, and here they would see the best examples of craftsmanship, and that would encourage them to produce things of that quality. That was a big assumption to be made at that time. However, so you have to understand how these basic assumptions underlie so much of how museums in India were set up, schools of art in India were set up. They were sort of very, what were considered emancipated, noble ideas of the time of sort of uplifting an uneducated and primitive race. However, there was not sufficient land, and due to congestion in the fort area, it was decided that the museum would be situated in Baikala, in the vicinity of the newly established botanical garden. Dr. George Birdwood and Dr. Bhau Daji Lad were named secretaries to the Museum Trust and were given the task of raising the funds for the new building, which was the first civic monument to be built by the citizens of Bombay to honor the Queen after the Crown took over the administration of the country from the East India Company. Meanwhile, the school started in a shed with the intention, and I quote, that a school of design would in time arise, native in the best sense, owing its accuracy, truth, and natural beauty to European inspiration, but molding its material into purely Indian types. Now, I hope you see the dichotomy there as well. In 1858, Terry took over as head of the school, and Terry was also, by the way, the curator of the museum, one of the earliest curators of the museum. And the museum and the school shared a kind of umbilical relationship for over 100 years. In 1858, Terry took over as head of the school, and the first few years were a struggle to get students and keep the enterprise going. In 1865, he was joined by two exemplary men who had been dispatched from London to consolidate the education program of the school. Lockwood Kipling, the father of the famous author Rudyard Kipling, who was in charge of sculpture and ornamentation, and John Griffiths, who was in charge of drawing and painting. Kipling had trained as a potter at Staffordshire and actively contributed to Terry's growing interest in pottery. Given the strategic importance of pottery and porcelain as an economic product, Terry had attempted to study local traditions and had started a small kiln at the school. The local kumbhars or potters who came from Gujarat originally were not a highly skilled group, so he decided to bring in a potter from the Sindh. Pottery from Sindh was admired for its beautiful forms and colors, as well as its expert glazing. This pottery was influenced by Persian motifs and designs, though legend has it that the tradition started with a Chinese potter. A master potter by the name of Nur Muhammad was employed by Terry, but he had been reluctant to travel south, and in the records it says that the commissioner had to persuade him, the collector and commissioner of the Sindh, had to persuade him and put a lot of pressure on him to travel south. And he had refused to part with his knowledge, as it was supposed to be a family trade secret. And he would lock the door. He would not allow anybody to come in when he was producing the pots. Another problem was that the clay was of an inferior quality, and it was surmised by the British that this was the reason a strong tradition of glazed pottery and porcelain did not exist in the region. Kaolin, the soft white clay, which is an essential ingredient for the production of porcelain and fine china, was not to be found in the Bombay region. Clay was therefore imported from Sindh, and this posed another problem for the production of pottery. Finally, after much trial and error, a combination of Kutch, Bombay, and Malwan clays were used, but it was still not of the superior quality required, for porcelain especially. The local kumbhars would throw the pots, and once shaped, the students from the drawing and painting department would decorate the pots, both processes being guided by Terry and Griffiths. The head potter from Sindh would then glaze the pots, imparting to it beautiful earth tones. This extraordinary enterprise, combining people of different religions, castes, traditions, and expertise, produced a range of beautiful pottery that was in constant demand and always sold out in the first week of the exhibitions. Now, this is very important to understand also because a lot of people ask, how is it that you are doing contemporary art in a traditional museum? But if you look at the history of this museum, and if you look at the way that it started, it was really a museum showcasing experimental practice of that time. And in a sense, we have gone back to that intention, that earlier intention. Of course, when it started, it was encyclopedic, and we had a very large classical collection. In fact, much of the classical collection that you see in the Prince of Wales Museum, a large part of it, came from the Bhau Daji Lad Museum. It was hived off and was given to the Prince of Wales Museum to start off the museum in the 1920s. I write about this in our book. So you must, if you're interested in learning more about that, you can buy the book, which is in the shop. Terry had hoped that the enterprise would become self-supporting and that its success would encourage students to join the pottery department and that he would be able to expand it into a sustainable business. But he did not account for the reluctance of the head potters from Sindh or the caste hierarchies of the kumbhars, something that bedeviled the school's stated aim of upgrading the skills of the craftsmen. Neither was the government sitting in London sympathetic to his cause, and so he did not receive much funding till much later. Terry therefore decided to set up a factory on his own, though he did use the resources of the school. Since he was superintendent and commissioner for several of the exhibitions, he used his clout to keep the enterprise going, and he personally supervised the exhibition and the execution of almost every pot. Okay, let me just go through and show you. Here is Dr. Bhau Daji Lad, who was, along with Birdwood, as you all know, the first secretary. They were the first secretaries of the museum. And of course, Bhau Daji Lad was a great scholar, and he was a renowned physician, doctor, and also the first Indian sheriff of Mumbai. And Birdwood also was an acknowledged art historian and really loved India, though there was this great conflict, and a lot of the people who loved, a lot of the Europeans who loved India, they could not bring themselves to acknowledge that India was not on par with them, but they really did appreciate the craftsmanship and design. So the whole focus of art education in the 19th centuries and when the schools were set up was on design, and it only changed really in the 1920s and 30s, but that's another story. We won't get into that. And here you have Terry on the left, on your left, and Lockwood Kipling and John Griffiths, who were all sort of really people who, in a sense, defined the whole aesthetic of Mumbai, of Bombay, of that period. These were the people who were advising the governor about buildings and how they should be built, and the whole planning of Mumbai, the cultural development of Mumbai. It was by these few men, especially these three. And here you see the head potter from Hala, working on the pots. And here you have a potter's wheel and a furnace at the J.J. School of Art. And here you have some more examples of pottery. And Ajanta, these are some of the Ajanta designs that were incorporated into the pottery. Griffiths, who became principal of the school on Terry's retirement in 1882, meanwhile, had embarked on a major project to document the Buddhist caves of Ajanta, which had been discovered by Captain John Smith in 1819. The earliest caves date to the 2nd century BCE, and the later caves to about the 10th century CE. The paintings and murals represent the acme of Indian art, and Griffiths was captivated by their beauty and refinement. From 1872 to 1885, he took his students to Ajanta to make copies of the murals and the decorative panels. These copies provided the inspiration for the decorative elements on much of the pottery, and there are much of these paintings, a lot of it got burnt down, and there was a fire at the Indian Museum, but there are some of it left, and they're all in the collection of the V&A. And then we discovered that there were copies that were made by students which are at the JJ School of Art. So we managed to get them for our exhibition, and this is what you see. These are some of the copies that we have, and that we will, when we open on the 1st, we will have that exhibition up again, and you can come and visit and see them. The designs were not restricted to copying the Ajanta murals. The natural flora patterns from Sindh were adapted, and several new shapes and colors were added to the repertoire of the pottery production. It is noted in the Journal of Indian Arts and Industry that visitors to the school were amazed to see uneducated potters, scantily clad, skillfully working the clay on the wheel and producing a range of about 300 shapes and sizes. Figures from the Jataka tales, the Buddhist stories, and episodes from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata were represented on the jars and vases. The lotus was the most ubiquitous flower to decorate the pots, and the style is mostly copied directly from the Ajanta paintings, producing a most refined and graceful effect. Another scene that was much in demand among the Europeans was of a Persian prince drinking wine. Representations of exotic flora and fauna, such as elephants, lions, parrots, and peacocks, were used to shape the handles of the base of the jars and vases. A particularly striking design of peacock feathers that has been much admired is in the collection of the Bhau Daji Lad Museum, and it forms a jali or net pattern all over the pot, with the base and the handles shaped like peacock fantails. However, this serendipitous confluence of styles and shapes lasted only as long as Terry took a personal interest in the project. In fact, it was initially known as Terry Ware and then later given the name of Wonderland Art Pottery. Its huge success as one of the most sought-after products ensured that it was dispersed across the globe. Collections of Bombay pottery exist in museums across Britain and Europe, as well as in the United States of America, notably at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, in Australia, at the Melbourne Museum, and at the New Zealand Museum. And there may be many other museums, but we have been trying to locate, but we have not been able to, but I'm sure that it is there in many collections. The V&A Museum London, which became the repository for objects collected for the India Museum, set up by the East India Company, however, has the largest collection. Some collections exist in Indian museums as well, including the National Museum, New Delhi, the Indian Museum, Kolkata, the Albert Hall in Jaipur, and possibly other museums across India as well. Bombay pottery was also showcased at many of the local industrial arts exhibitions, which had become popular across India and were held with great regularity. So we assume that they're there in several other museums as well. Another important venue for publicizing and selling Indian crafts was the glamorous store Liberties of London. In fact, as art historian Saloni Mathur notes, post-1851, London was inundated with Indian culture as new forms of exhibitionary displays were used unabashedly for commercial purposes. These were complemented by stores like Liberty and frequent displays of panoramas at Wembley Stadium and other venues that provided a panoptical vision of the subcontinent. The men who guided and shaped this reception of Indian arts and culture, including George Birdwood, John Lockwood Kipling, Caspar Purdon Clark, John Forbes Watson, and others who were imbued with the purpose of empire to civilize the primitive races. Disdainful of India's fine arts like his compatriots, Birdwood contemptuously referred to a beautiful statue of the Buddha as passionless as a boiled, and I quote, as passionless as a boiled suet pudding. He nonetheless, like the others, could not ignore its great architecture, its unique textiles that had been prized for centuries, and its skill in other crafts. At the time, the arts and crafts movement had developed in response to the rush of industrialization that had overtaken Britain, which Birdwood, who was a preservationist at heart, abhorred. As a close associate of John Ruskin and William Morris, he helped define the ideas of Indian craftsmanship, which would become so popular in Britain, and he employed a convoluted logic to support his theories. He constructed a pastoral landscape in which the traditional arts of India had sustained over thousands of years because of lack of exposure to the outside world. I mean, this is so incorrect. Thus, this fed into the prevailing romantic ideology that had overcome Europe and Britain. So the entire effort of these gentlemen who guided the Department of Science and Art, which was known as the DSA, in London, and who supervised art education in India, was to ensure that Indian crafts were preserved in their original form. It should have been obvious that given the huge technological changes taking place across the world, this was unsustainable, but so set were these men on their mission of reform that they did not perceive the inconsistencies of their argument. The DSA was the chief architect of art and design education in both Britain and the subcontinent. It hired principals and teachers who were sent across the subcontinent to teach new techniques of draftsmanship that would be useful to the colonial administration in documenting the empire. At the same time, these officials were required to preserve the ancient craft skills they prized for their economic potential. This contradiction lies at the heart of the failure of the art educational system in colonial India. Students were required to copy from ancient sites like Ajanta and were taught naturalist perspective to improve their powers of observation, but the focus of that teaching was on acquiring technical skills for making objects that could provide an impetus for trade. The students, however, rejected these restrictions, and the school was only able to attract the more educated youth, despite giving scholarships, as both language and caste hierarchies prevented the sons of craftspeople for whom the course was originally aimed from participating. Neither was there demand for these decorative Indian products, because the Indian elite wanted to showcase European objects. So they would go to Europe and buy up huge quantities of European objects, and the ordinary people were not interested. They didn't have the means or the wherewithal to put up such displays. So there was no demand for the Indian decorative objects except internationally. This indeed was the reason for the failure of possibly one of the most comprehensive experiments in design education in India carried out by Terry. After Terry retired in 1872, the year the V&A Bombay opened to the public, that's the building that we have in front, and that's celebrating 151 years this year. He was allowed to continue the small factory he had established, as he had invested a substantial sum of £2,000 to keep the enterprise going. Meanwhile, the government took over the pottery kiln and class at the school in 1909, and given the popularity of Wonderland pottery, decided to bring in a pottery teacher and establish an expanded pottery class as part of the George C. Clark Technical Laboratories and Studios at the school. They tested clays and set up new kilns and developed mechanized production systems. Ernest Fern, who was also curator at the V&A Bombay Museum and director of the Clark Labs, shifted focus from handmade products to mechanized, mass-produced merchandise like pottery dishes, tiles, drainage pipes, etc. The centenary publication of the J.J. School of Art, The Story of Sir J.J. School of Art, criticizes Fern for being ignorant of traditional techniques and trying to modernize rather than appreciate, and I quote, the decorative qualities achieved by the traditional methods. Terry's wonderful experiment unfortunately did not sustain without his genius and dedication, and was reduced to a tawdry commercial enterprise that was eventually shut down. I'm going to quickly take you through the rest of the slides. Just these are the Ajanta copies by the students of the JJ School of Art. And here you see the similarities. You can see the Kirti Mukta there, it's here. And you can see also the similarities of and the inspiration from Ajanta. And here you see, again, a lot of the handles were taken from paintings of fauna from Ajanta. And here you see the signature of the craftsman. You see a Hindu signature here and a Muslim signature here. And this is, of course, the very well-known image of the Great Exhibition of 1851, which started this whole production of arts and crafts in India in museums and art schools. And here is a postcard that John Lockwood Kipling sent to a friend of his, saying that, "Did you look at the Bombay School of Art pottery as you passed?" He asked, "Some of their recent things are very good. The Society of Arts Artisan reports on the Paris Universal Exhibition of 1878 agreed, finding the Indian fascians and terracotta to be of a very artistic order, both in color and design. All the Indian pottery is worth close inspection." This was not, there wasn't a kind of uniform praise for the pottery, but I won't go into that. This is the Paris Universal Exhibition that had a huge display. This is the Indian Pavilion. Just look at how glamorous it was. They built these pavilions, like they build the Indian weddings now that you see. They replicate anything. They can replicate a palace, anything. It's a very similar way. These great exhibitions, each pavilion was very grandiose. And this is the Indian Pavilion at the Paris exhibition. And here on the left is the Melbourne Court, and on the right is the Calcutta exhibition, from where Griffiths bought quite a large collection of pottery for the museum. And here, this is the Indian section of the Colonial and Indian exhibition in London. And this was bought, Caspar Purdon Clark bought this vase for the V&A. And this is at the Chicago exhibition, the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, where Vivekananda had spoken. And there were 850 pieces, the largest number ever exported from India. The beauty and elegance of these specimens of Indian workmanship will not fail to be appreciated by American citizens, by an American citizen and his guests. And here you see some more. These are from the collection at the V&A. And this is the decline of the, unfortunate decline of the pottery department. And here on the left is Ernest Fern, and on the right is George Burns. They were both principals of the School of Art. Especially Burns was a very important principal. And they were also curators of the museum. And here you see these are potters at the Clark Technical Institute. And these are some from, this is in our collection. There's a whole display of the Clark pottery in the museum. So we hope to open the museum by the end of January, and you can come back and see the pottery. And we do a lot of education programs around the pottery. Pottery is the favorite workshop. And here you can see how delighted this child is on the right. And a lot of this and other stories are in the book, which you can get in the museum shop. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
I'm delighted to be here and to welcome you all to a curtain raiser event for the Indian Ceramics Triennale, which the next edition of which opens in Delhi on the 19th of January 2024. It is our endeavor to bring ceramics into the sort of public domain, bring new developments in ceramic art practice to a new audience and to audiences in India and abroad, from India and abroad. We are an artist-led initiative. We are a group of 8 people who got together about 6 or 7 years ago to showcase what was happening in India, and the idea was to bring the best of what was happening in India as well as bring interesting practices from abroad to an Indian audience. So I would like to sort of take you through a little bit of what we have planned for the next edition and who our artists are. And I'll start with actually giving you a little bit of background of the first edition. There's a short film which I'll sort of run through and then give you an idea of what kind of what our sort of last edition looked like, and then introduce you to Common Ground, which is the next edition, which opens in January, as I said, in Delhi at Arthshila. The first edition was breaking ground because it was really the first time that we were trying to showcase ceramic in scale, in working with ceramic in all its materiality, its scale, its as a performance, technology, and so if you have I'll let you see the film, and that will sort of give you an idea of what we were trying to do. Thank you. So as I said, our last edition was called Breaking Ground because that was what we were trying to do. We were trying to break ground. We were trying to start something new, ceramics. As we sort of worked towards the next edition, we felt it was a time to bring together different kind of practices, different kind of the tradition and the contemporary, and practices that interrogate histories, and look at sort of that integrate the second edition is, intends to sort of bring together different voices and be a catalyst for new ideas and possibilities of the material, and be an inclusive space where conversations and different types of conversations in clay can happen. We have a fairly eclectic list of artists who are going to be a part of the next edition, and I'd like to share that list with you. And so these are some of our, these are our artists. We have Abhir Patwardhan from Pune, who's largely doing sculptural ceramics. Andrew Burton is from the UK, and he's working with Lillian from Uganda, and they'll be in Delhi working with Bitura makers, women who work with gobar and make these large gobar structures. We have Ankon Mitra, who's known to be a paper folding artist and an architect, and he'll be working in ceramics, in porcelain. Ashish Chaudhary from Calcutta, from Bengal. Asta Butel from Delhi. She's exploring ideas of the nature of the ceramic material. Avdesh Tarmarkar from Baroda. Virendra Kumar Yadav, who's grown up with brick makers and are surrounded by brick makers and has worked very closely with them. So his practice explores the lives of brick makers and the remnants that they leave behind. We have the Chinnagama project from Pondicherry. Remika has built the first and perhaps the only, not the only, has built the first anagama kiln in India. And this has been a kiln that's been fired for the last 15 years or so, I would say. And this project will cover international and Indian artists who've been a part of the Chinnagama project. Copper Sounds are a UK duo of ceramic artists who work with music and music made by ceramic objects. They're going to be coming to India and working with a traditional ghatam maker and a ghatam player, Sumana Chandrasekhar, and they'll be in residence at Artichol and will be in Delhi for the opening and for a performance. We're working with Creative Dignity as well. This is an organization that works with traditional potters. So, and Rajesh Kulkarni is a potter who works in terracotta in Indapur, not very far from Bombay. And he's working with Raju Sutar and the traditional potters to create an installation. Deepak Kumar from Delhi is very concerned about the environment and the impact of urbanization on the environment, and his work reflects his investigations in that area. Dhruvi, who's here with us today, and she'll speak more about her practice with Abhay later, will also be at the Triennale. Efrat is from Israel, and her work will also be at the Triennale. Eliza is a Canadian artist working in working in the US, and she has some really beautiful work, and she's going to be in residence at NID and also will be in Delhi. Heidi McKenzie from Canada. She has Indian roots, so she's investigating she's from a family of indentured labor. Some members of her family came across to probably the Caribbean, and she now lives in Canada, so she's looking at histories related to indentured labor and migration. we actually, all these artists have come to us through an international open call. So they've all responded to our call. We had over 370 applications, and we had only space. It's a much smaller space than, and a different kind of space from JKK in Jaipur. So we had only space for 30 odd artists. So we have 34 at the moment. The Hermannsburg Potters are indigenous Australian artists, and they are making work with clay from their country. And they're going to carry clay from their country as well as the fired work to Delhi. And they will be doing a demonstration as well as a talk at our symposium. Kate Roberts does some beautiful work with unfired clay and cord, and she will be with us and installing in Arthshila. She's from the US. Then Kavita Pandya from Gujarat will be working with textiles and clay. We have Kumar Ismail Hussain and Mohammad Hussain, who are from Kutch, and they will also be at the Triennale. Kushala Vora, who's doing a performance piece. Lola Ben and Penmai and Sasha are artists from the University of Columbia, and they work in a materials lab, and they're looking at all very interesting new materials research with clay and fiber. And they are also going to be in residence for a while in Artichol, and will be with us. Their work is performative as well. Mini Singh, Mansimran Singh, is known to many potters. He's Gurcharan Singh's son, Sardar Gurcharan Singh's son, and very much involved with the Andretta pottery in Himachal. And he's working with a traditional potter, and there will be a few works by him as well at the Triennale. Oksana Geets is an artist who's based in the UK, so we have some of her work as well. Om Prakash Gallav is a traditional potter, but a national award winner, I would imagine, and a very accomplished craftsperson, and he will be also with us. Parag, who's here, who's very much a part of the Koli community, and his works explores certain ideas, but he's interestingly been working with artists in Bastar, so there's an interesting mix happening there. Parag will be speaking later with Abhay. Prithviraj Mali, who's worked in terracotta. Rita is from the Philippines, and she will be doing a live performance and building a sculpture and doing a live firing and performance at Sanskriti Kendra. Roy Mayan and Erez Mayan are brothers from Israel, and they will be doing a performative work. Shraddha Joshi, who's here with us, and her colleague Ross from Cardiff are working in porcelain and working with porcelain and light. Smogware is a very interesting group from the Netherlands, and they're interested in the environment and ideas of and pollution, and they actually are collecting, are making work which is sort of directly involves collecting pollutants and residue. Teja is here with us. She'll speak more about her practice. Vinita is here as well. Yu King Kung is from Korea, and she's taken kintsugi, which is a process by which broken pots were joined in the old days to another level. So we're going to have one work from her. And then Yulia will be working with virtual reality. So that's another whole new area with ceramics. So these are some of our artists. And and we have, of course, the preview, as I mentioned, 19th of January. And we have programming at Arthshila, which is on the 20th and 21st. Then there will be a symposium with some very interesting speakers. Vanmala, who's here in the audience, will be one of our speakers. We have people from the US, Elaine, who's a very well-known writer. She'll also be doing a critical writing workshop for us. We have artist demos and performances again at Sanskriti, including Rita's, exhibition walkthroughs, etc. at Artshila, and then artist workshops at Sanskriti Kendra through the period of the Triennale. We have an exhibition by members of the International Academy of Ceramics, which is one of the premier international bodies for ceramic artists. And this is a short exhibition, just for about a week. And we have about 60 IAC members who will be showcasing their work. There are a number of IAC members in India as well, so their work will be showcased as well. At the India Art Fair, we have launched into a very ambitious community project. We put out a call. We invited all artists to participate. And we will have about 100 artists, I think, who will make an installation. I mean, there will be an installation of work of 100 artists from across the country. We also plan an exhibition of the doyens of clay, ladies who have been instrumental in teaching and in really pushing the practice in India. Nirmala Patwardhan, Jyotsna Bhatt, Deborah Smith, and Ira Chaudhary. Unfortunately, the first three are no longer with us, but Ira is still very much around. And we hope to have this exhibition towards the end of in March, which is actually Women's History Month. So that's when we hope to do this. And we'd like to thank our supporters and partners. And yeah, as I said, we're an artist-led initiative. We're all volunteers. That's us. There's Vineet Kakkar in Delhi, myself, Neha Kutchatkar, Madhvi, who will be speaking to you later, Sharbani, who's here, and Riaz, Sangeeta, who's here, and Khanika. And the thing is, with this Triennale, we're all over the place. We have people, I mean, Sharbani lives in New Mexico, I live in Bombay, Vineet lives in Delhi. So it's a real, it's a labor of love. So we don't have a sort of a huge infrastructure behind us. It's just individuals who've got together, who've known each other, and we have a passion to try and push ceramics out into the open and into another context, and not only to be seen as only as functional wear, which is also very important. And the exhibition does have some functional wear in it, but also to push the possibilities of the material out there, to encourage and to inspire other artists to sort of look at the material and the possibilities that it holds. Yeah, so that's it. Save the date. Please come, and we'd love to have you all there. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Tasneem Mehta and the Dr. Bhau Daji Lad Museum and Avid for hosting this for us and giving us a lot of encouragement by doing this for us, because it really makes a big difference when we have a nice audience and support from people who've been in this field for so long. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Hello. I'm Sharbani, the one who came from New Mexico. Can you hear me? Yeah. I slept this afternoon so that I wouldn't fall asleep now. But I'd like to invite our local artists, the ones who are from Bombay, to come up and have a discussion. And Abhay will be interviewing them. And we thought it would be interesting for you to get a little bit of an idea of what they want to do at the Triennale. So I used iMovie. I'm not a movie maker, but I just put together something about their statements and what they're saying about their work, and it'll be in this film. After it's over, Abhay Sardesai, who's been an editor of Art India for many, many years, as an educator, and has also just curated a show at Sassoon. He will be guiding us through an interview with the artists. So without further ado, I'll let you see what these guys are talking about.
I'm Dhruvi Acharya, a visual artist based in Mumbai, India. In my work, I focus on the discord and violence in women's lives caused by gender-based discrimination, as well as the degradation of our environment due to patriarchal and capitalist ways of thinking. I create a world where thoughts are as visible as reality, and the protagonists live and metamorphose by the logic of that world. Humor is an important aspect of my work as it allows one to dwell on our human follies without being didactic, and it allows for the celebration of life, showing that there is joy in the gaps and a certain resistance. I also address expectations our society has of women's bodies as well as bodily changes from a female and personal perspective. My work for the Ceramics Triennale is an extension of those themes. Through the small tabletop size clay forms, ideas come to life in a different manner. In the 101 piece installation that I have created, the sculptures have become creatures forming their own city.
Hi, I am Parag Tandil. I am a visual autoethnographer from Mumbai. The production of sculpture was executed at Dr. Jaidev Bagil's Dogra Art Center, which is in Kondagaon, Chhattisgarh. My work for Indian Ceramics Triennale 2024 in Delhi is sculptural installation titled Mali, Jal Jungle Zameen. It is archiving various times such as botanical time, biological time, and geological time of this material culture. Furthermore, I am archiving local Adivasi food that naturally grows in forest soils, from which these various clays have been created. A hybrid version of Mother Goddess from the Koli community. Mali is a symbol of fertility, a non anthropocentric icon.
Hi, I am Ross Andrews, and my studio is based in Cardiff, South Wales. This is in collaboration with Shraddha.
My name is Shraddha Joshi. I am a ceramic artist based in Cardiff, UK. My works in Indian Ceramics Triennale 2024 is exploring traditional methods of mold making and slip casting used in Renaissance times. For me, the relationship between pattern and form and the ability of one element used in a repetitive arrangement to transform into something greater than the sum of its part hints at the divine. The divine plan originates in sacred geometry and the fundamental platonic solid that carry earth, water, fire, air, and ether. The installation for the Triennale uses interconnected platonic solid to create a multi-axis reality.
My name is Vinita Mungi and I'm a ceramic artist based out of Mumbai, India. For the Indian Ceramics Triennale, this time around I've made my most ambitious sculpture yet. While my work deals with themes related to gender and sexuality and normalizing of the same, it also delves a little bit into post-colonial feminism and what that means to me. As a contemporary Indian woman, I feel like it was important for me to deal with themes that I could personally relate to upon coming back from university. So with my work, I explore themes of gender and sexuality through symbols that blend into nature, that might resemble phallic objects or might also look like flowers, insects, trees. So they're all organic looking forms that become the architecture of the work itself. This piece was made without any scaffolding or supporting materials as one unique form. The piece is laden with details that are all hand-built as well, along with some pinching. What makes this piece really unique for me is that this is my first time exploring, aside from oxides and slips, also using glazes that provide texture and color.
Hi, I'm Teja Gavankar, based in Mumbai, and my work for the Indian Ceramic Triennale 2024 in Delhi is called Neti Neti, which signifies the negation of identity by saying not this, not that, or neither this nor that. The artwork takes the form of two cones that partially merge into each other, sharing some common elements. These shared components shifts between the cones, creating an ever-changing and unstable situation when viewers interact with the piece. This interplay represents the duality of completeness and incompleteness. Ultimately, they form a larger and unified whole, representing the concept of Advaita, where the material world transcends into the realm of eternity.
Thanks, Sharbani. Thanks, Anjani, Tasneem, and Madhvi, of course. I think our friend Mr. Lalljee has made good his escape.
I'm right here.
All right. Apologies. All right, it's such a privilege and pleasure to be here with all of you. And what we'll do is we don't really have too much time, right? So what we'll do is I'll make some observations and then maybe throw open a question which all of you can take. So what I thought is since we don't really have too much time, what we'll do is we'll start with some stray observations and then I'll request you to sort of consider those observations and you could respond to them. And then after that, maybe we could go from person to person, artist to artist, or maybe locate a cluster of artists who have a shared set of enthusiasms, right? So, I was just looking at the film and of course I know Dhruvi's and Parag's work very well, but Vinita, Shraddha and Teja, I've sort of, Vinita of course, yes, I've had occasion at Kemol Collab, but Teja and Shraddha, I'm meeting you for the first time. Teja, I think we've met before. But it's such a rich bouquet of themes that all of you seem to address and such a very, very vibrant quiver of subjects, as it were. With Dhruvi, what really sort of socks it into the solar plexus is the stifled scream, which sits at the center of all your toothy flowers, right? It's quite searing and severe, both at once. Parag, of course, one is quite entranced by your decision to meld both the roles, as an artist and as an archivist. Also sort of to engage ethnographically with different subaltern cultures. And I use the word subaltern in the way it's used by historians, not in any other way. So I know about your work, for instance, with the Kodis in Maharashtra, in Mumbai, in Thane especially. And now you're also working with sort of the Adivasis in Bastar. Vinita, one finds this incredible, again, sort of drawing, to extend the idea of the archive. One finds in your, celebratory, excessive forms, this desire to sort of create different stations where one could probably locate, one could probably allow for the cradling of different moments, different experiences, especially because, I remember you talking about all the different points of arrival and departure that have exercised such an important influence on your life as you were growing up. So I actually look at the work that I saw on the screen as a kind of a repository, as a kind of a reliquary, as it were, where in a very, very interestingly contradictory, interestingly ambivalent way, there is celebration, but there is also tragedy, right? Shraddha, there is this incredibly incantatory feel to a lot of the work that you have been doing, especially this desire, this insistence on exploring and excavating meaning from acts of repetition, from acts of pattern making. And that can be quite hypnotic, right? And Teja, in your case, one is, the project seems to be quite clear. This is not to take away from the complexity and the layered way in which you approach it. The project seems to be to uncover the architecture of what one might call the metaphysical and reclaim the metaphysics of architecture, more or less. It's such a, as I said at the very outset, such a rich sort of body of work that all of you have put on display, and such a magnificent range of voices, that to start off with, the question that I'd like to actually raise is about how did all this matter, how did all this subject lead you to choose the medium? Or how did the medium come and choose you and all the matter that you represent? Shraddha, would you like to take it?
Well, when I started JJ School of Art, my undergraduation program, sorry for the voice, it's really bad. But I just feel that this is instant gratification. Like you made something out of the scratch and it stays forever. So this is incredible. Like what else you want in the world? And we think in visuals and images. So everything is possible. So the canvas is like broad. So there was no other choice other than the clay. But as you go more intense, you can explore the possibilities of you, and it becomes very surreal that who are you and a spirit and the clay. So you live your works, and for me, form takes all the credit. So clay is raw, and the process itself is very interesting than the final outcome.
I also asked this question because there's this very vexing thing that we were discussing some time back about the labels. and the various sort of categories that people choose to belong to. Some people are dedicated ceramic artists, some people are accused of flirting with ceramics, some people are what one might call sort of, multitasking visual artists, and so on and so forth. So there are people who identify themselves purposefully, deliberately as ceramicists. There are artists who actually choose not to do that. And there are artists I know who have midway decided to drop the ceramicist tag and chosen to go in for a visual artist tag. So there are all kinds of ways of belonging here, ways of being and becoming. So that's the context within which one wants to ask this question. Also, I feel that it's also quite unfair to use one tag to, actually categorize one artist. And that's the reason why I want to ask how the medium sort of came and presented itself to you, and how you sort of went a few steps ahead and decided to shake hands with the medium. Anita?
I think your question is really interesting, and I also kind of want to piggyback on what she said. She said that working with clay was gratifying, instantly gratifying, and my experience is the exact opposite. I feel like the struggle with working with a piece and having it actually actualize in the kiln, second firing, third firing, transporting it back, having it placed in someone's home, or just taken over in an environment, it's a long process. And I feel like that kind of brings me back to how ceramics chose me. I feel like it is such a demanding material that if you choose to work with it, it's going to take over your life. You can't play or dabble with ceramics. Like, I used to dabble with wood, I used to dabble with metal, but then I had to learn the processes of ceramics. I had to understand how to work with it in a very in-depth fashion, because I don't think you can work in an experimental way very successfully if you're just starting off with clay. I think only after you kind of hone in your skills can you reach a point of experimentation, which is also why I love ceramics, which is also why I hate ceramics, and it's going to be a relationship for life. But yeah, I think ceramics chose me definitely before I chose it.
So in my case, I'm a painter, and I end up doing installation, site-specific work, and then sculpture when I moved back to Bombay. And I started with brick because I was initially working with cuboid and, geometric forms. And then when I moved to do masters in Baroda, it become, cuboid become a brick, because that's... then it end up like brick become architectural stuff. So I started responding to the architecture. So for me, the brick is something which is like most ancient material when civilization start. It portray our intervention, human intervention in the society, and that's how the brick is also something which is not shaping. It's not a shaping material. It's like you're building, and with the act of building, with act of layering, you're shaping a form. So it's always interesting for me to look at brick in that way, and that's how it's like, the conical form looks like again, it's a chimney sometime, it's conical. So again, it's a brick material. So it has the resemblance of, all these chimneys and build forms and all these aspects of our civilized society. So that's how.
So I'm primarily a painter. I used to consider myself a painter for a long time, but in 2016 I took on making sculptures with fabric. And seeing, it was just, I don't know, I had a desire to make something in 3D at some point. And I took some classes in ceramics, and it was just, I was thrown back to kindergarten when I loved playing with clay. All my report cards said she spends all day playing with plasticine. And it was just something that
I don't know, just brought me great joy. I was alone in New York for about 5 months, and I just remember entire weekends, morning to night, and I'm forgetting to eat because you're struggling with clay I was still starting out, but it was just the struggle with clay, but then the joy of it, and the immediacy of the material, and the difficulty of using it. All of it, I think now it's you were saying flirting with it, I think it's a keeper now.
Actually, I feel that I'm a sculpture wala and pakka sculpture wala, and of course the materials are like daily life. You have to find new materials, but I was thinking since long that what is our material culture, being local, and I being Koli, what is my material culture if colonization is not happening? Of course, my last solo was about the same thing, but I took material as a metaphor also. And going to the Bastar means why the local Koli man is going to the Bastar. So interesting part is that I want to study more what was there early, and still that part, the Bastar part, is not untouched. And it's very like Vinita said, and she said, gratitude. It was so pleasure and so thankful I worked in Bastar clay. And those clays are like that. Casting technique is 5,000 year old, like more than 5,000 year old. And I saw that it is somewhere stuck in that Jaidev Baghel's craft, creativity. But I find many things like the way I see the materials. So there are few materials like we start with farm clay, then rice husk, river clay, wax, that is beeswax. Then there is termite clay. Then there is firewood. So these materials make us think about so many things. Like termite hills, there are like, because of its saliva, it is like when there is fire in the forest. So the fire doesn't affect the termite hill. So these means whole project I did was like about documenting geological time, and as I said, different times. But moreover, I again surpassed and I challenged what grows in those soil, because these clays were earlier soils, and I found that these forest clays, there are different varieties of vegetables, mushrooms which grow, and Adivasis eat them, and we documented, like Neelam, and my wife is there. Kadambari came last 10 days and she helped me to document from market. We documented recipes which are going to put up in, will be there in the sculpture. So I will let the material pulls you, it attracts you, and it shows to you the ways to think and rethink about the materials. And I think being in the time of climate change, we need to think about various materials which are very much important.
Absolutely. It's like what some of the best Marxist historians have told us, that the history of materials is really the material of history. My favorite historian, Dharmanand T.D. Kosambi, often used to talk about, and so does Romila Thapar, and he talks about different kinds of pottery ware and the ways in which these pottery wares can actually help you identify different stages of growth as far as communities and civilizations are concerned. But one question I really want to ask you, and this is something that I I think we had an occasion to talk about it when we met at your wonderful show at Turk some months back, is about the idea of the archive, the idea of the dynamic archive. And that archive is such that it includes all kinds of things, including recipes, including drawings and sculptural sort of portmanteau objects. It includes different kinds of submerged histories. It includes oral sort of documentation. And this is something that you have been trying to do for quite some time. I remember even at the Delhi Art Fair, you had this huge installation of different kinds of fish forms that were hanging. And there's this need and there's this necessity to put the Koli community, which you belong to, at the center of your research-based practice. Now, the work that you have here, as you said, is a representation of a fertility goddess. And at your show, I remember, there were all these different gods, right, with specific names. And I think many of them were sculptural objects. Would you like to talk about them? Would you like to talk about the idea that you create gods out of different kinds of materials? What does that mean? And I'm saying this also because you brought up the idea of material as metaphor, right?
Yeah, actually, material itself talks, like I said earlier for his earlier question, that beeswax talks about home, then termite hills talk about home. Farming talks about how much old our cognitive skills.
Absolutely. In the Konkan, for example, we have the Santeri Devi, who actually lives in the anthill.
Yeah. And, I am more interested in gods because, moreover, gods, they are goddesses. They are actually gods of the nature. They are non-anthropocentric, first thing. And, it's very interesting that how they came into the Brahminical or Hindu context. They were bought, they were pulled on. They were pulled on by some narratives which were created by some people. So I somewhere want to break those narratives and keep them as a non-anthropocentric also, by bringing materials which are local to the gods also, which are there. And I feel that it's kind of we all were biophilic, and our beliefs were biophilic. And talking about clay as a practice, it's pulls you down on the ground, and it all means it grounds you, like ceramic or terracotta, let it be anything. The thing means when you talk about clay, you just get down, and it's that's all. I hope the question is big and like.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to jump from what you just said and ask Teja this question about, the idea of neti, again, the idea of the religious and the spiritual. And that's one reason why I'm jumping onto you. The idea of constantly denying and constantly divesting yourself, disrobing yourself, and then arriving at the essence or the oneness of the Atma, the notion of oneness. Also, the notion of iteration and reiteration and repetition, and which is at the center of the shloka or the stotra in a lot of our Indic traditions. Looking at the work of both of you. I'm sort of curious to know whether there is a larger map of renunciation that you conjure up in the process of creating your works. Because a lot of pottery is also just that, right? It's throwing away things, it's editing out material. So again, to draw from what Parag was saying, material as metaphor, your acts sort of being replicated in your thoughts, and your thoughts sort of slowly mirroring your acts. So I'm just curious, again, because Parag threw up this very interesting idea of non-anthropomorphic gods. Is your practice a way of, forgive me for being a little mischievous, of rescuing the spiritual from the religious? Because he is actually documenting, tabulating, whereas in your work, I find that there is a certain way of interiorizing, of sort of a certain what one might call dhyana magnata, and at the same time denying the outer sort of world, the outer sort of trappings that religion sort of invests you with. Is that something that you agree with, or is that something that...
I would straight away say that I have found the gist or the essence is just the same, but visual narratives were different in all the religions. I started digging deep about this particular flower of life pattern, visiting all the beautiful Catholic churches in the structural way, and whether it's a stained glass or all the elements. And then I right away jumped in Morocco's beautiful mosques. I was there 16 days, staying up, looking at the mosaic patterns. So, and these two references from a very contrast religious beliefs or cultures in development, civilizations, history-wise. And when I look back to my childhood, where there has to be like the white sand rangoli pattern, and my favorite pattern was the Saraswati because I like the triangles. It's simple and it's beautiful. And when I kind of drilled to the roots, I just found these are just the 2D shadows of a 3D structure. And being a science student, I realized the physics and spirituality is just the same, but it's our way. If you like it visually, that's the sacred geometry in Christianity, in Western world. I lived in there, so I could map through that. So this was for the flower of life pattern, and I would say Christianity says the same thing. Hinduism says in different format, but their exploration and journeys were different with the whole map. But I will definitely not escape. The political and social, economical factors can affect, but that would be a curatorial part, not my part. As a maker, I believe it's just the same thing in different languages, same kind of thing. But when it got invaded, I am not yet that research based, but with the whole, like the feel of getting lost, you get to see that, they're just as deep as, like one life is very short to explore just one pattern.
So I should start from the beginning maybe because that's how after graduation I started having this question, because the grammar was there, the language was there, but the, what I wanted to say. So I started discovering who I am, and then the question, like, again, it is not, I'm not this, I'm not that kind of. And then when I proposed this piece for the common ground, it was a static one when there is no movement as such, And then simultaneously I like to listen to classical music, etc. So I was listening to a bhajan, Tuza Saguna Mhanu Ki Nirguna Re, where devotee is asking, is in a confused state, and it's like
form and formlessness.
Yeah, formless, or is it complete or incomplete? So this kind of a conflict, and then I find it's, this dualism which I was talking, that, it's is this as well as that, it's neither this nor that. So it's kind of a mixture which we are in this state, which, the devotee is also talking about the same thing. It's neither that, it's after all, it's all about the supremacy, it's a oneness that. So that's how I started looking at the sculpture as, I should bring the movement into it, where I can engage a viewer to, look at the transition, and as well as one can perceive the, that a bigger cone in that transition, which is not there as a form. Right. So, the viewer is perceiving as, it's there, it's colliding somewhere in the infinity, kind of. So, yeah, I'm a little bit, I like to read J. Krishnamurti, and, it's my work is about perception, and I conduct many modules on ways of seeing. So it's I teach at architecture college more than a decade now. So I have this notion of looking at things and what they are, and as a purist form.
It comes across. Yeah. Yes, right. Definitely. Dhruvi and Vinita, the last two people on the panel. Dhruvi, in your case, the balance between this bright-eyed pop art-ness of life and this crazy, wide-eyed grotesquerie is something that actually this balance, of course, and also the strategic imbalance between these two things is actually what allows for the creation of meaning. And it also allows for the viewer to enter your space. The fragment, the idea of loss, decapitation, contortion, pain coexists with the idea of pleasure in various capacities. In what one might call your cute monstrosities. They both appeal and they repel at the same time. In your work, Vinita, there is a great amount of savagery as well. There's a fierceness, and it's a portrait of brutalization, really, a lot of your work. And I talk about the smaller work that you had put on display. I'm referring to your breast stories work, where you insistently drew on Mahashweta Devi, and your work here as well, where as I said at the very outset, it's both celebratory and at the same time there is a great amount of tragedy. So I just want to ask both of you whether the body, the human body, the female body is the first port of call, and if so, how do you arrive at it? Is it the aging body? Is it the brutalized body? Is it the regenerative body? How is it that you actually go about looking at all these different kinds of bodies progressively?
Well, it's all of them. For me, so my practice as a painter started when I moved to the US, I was homesick, and I drew memories of home. So from that time, it was what is home? What is my home? Where am I? Questions about the Indian culture, the way women were looked at. So all of this has informed my work for the last, 25 years or so, I guess. And part of it, my mind exists in a female form, a female body. And in India, all the women will know that, the body brings about a lot of difficulties in even crossing the road or walking on the road to having a moment in a park. Everything is a challenge sometimes, right? And especially when you're younger. And so all those things have informed my work. And aging body, of course, death, violence, and I mean, you just open the newspaper and you know what's happening, and all of that informs our work in terms of women. And of course, the environment has also been a very important part, and I'm finding that the respect for women and the respect for our planet are in some way, I think it's joined. And that's where I'm feeling more and more that, if you respect one, you'd respect the other. It's both forms of energy. It is where, we are creators. And that's what's addressing my work. And so in this body of work, I just wanted to bring to the 3D form. And it was not, I didn't have a sketch. I was just sitting with the clay and, what's on my mind, whatever I read, and it would just come out.
So for me, it's the same actually. The process is very similar as what she described. When I'm working with a piece, whether it's something small that you can contain within your hand or something like what I made for the Triennale, which is almost 5 feet by 5 feet by 5 feet, it never starts as a drawing or a sketch. Right. The clay kind of dictates the form. Also, that being said, it's not quite spontaneous because working on a certain aspect of the work ends up being 6-7 hours of the day. So by then I've already contemplated what my next move is, so on and so forth. So I think in terms of construction, yes, it is very much sitting with my thoughts, trying to understand what I'm trying to convey through the work and bring that across. And then for the project that you spoke about, the show that I just did at Keynote Collab, that was very specific to kind of sitting with my thoughts, sitting with stories of violence, sexual, physical violence against women in my life as well as mine, and talking about that through each piece that I worked on. And for me, when I start working with clay, it's a distraction, but it's also meditative. For this specific project, I did not want to get into that space, because that puts me in a space of celebration and joy and love, and all those things that I got from this piece for the Triennale. Right. I denied myself for that. So I kind of work parallelly on these works within the same time span. And I think the body plays a huge role, and every person, I think every artist starts from, I might be wrong and people might not agree with me, but a place of narcissism. And we all want to discover ourselves and our self-identity through our works, because we're all really important people. We all need to say what we need to say. And then trying to discover my self-identity, of course, helped me come to the realization that what does it mean to be a woman of color in America? That wasn't quite my story. So I knew I had to come back to India, rediscover myself, understand what feminism for me meant. I already knew I was a feminist. Then I had to understand what that meant for me. Hence post-colonial feminism. English is my primary language, which is a sad story, sad reality, but it is what it is. Right. And that immediately leads me to post-colonial feminism, because that is the direct effect of it. And then understanding my context, understanding who I am, and then all of that kind of translated through clay, through creating these environments, and then normalizing the female body into the architecture of these celebratory but also tragic sculptures.
Right. Thank you so much, all of you. And I hope we can continue this conversation. Can I invite Madhvi to come and invite her panel?
Thank you all for being here. Once you all settle down, we can shift to the next panel. Very exciting panel. We want to first of all welcome our guests from UK. And they're really a very esteemed group of people. We're very fortunate to have them here, and we're so happy to have them be part of this this launch. So I'm going to quickly just tell you a little bit about them. They are from the University of Westminster, and they have a ceramic research center from in the university, which they are a part of, and. This includes Tessa Peters, there's Claire Toomey, and Phoebe Cummings, and there's one more person, Christy Brown. She's not here, she couldn't travel, but Tessa's going to talk about her. So I'm just going to quickly tell you a little bit about them. I'll start with Tessa. Tessa is a senior lecturer at the University of Westminster. She's a researcher and University Centre of Research and Education in Art and Media, which is CREAM stands for CREAM, and the Center of and Ceramic Research Center, UK. So the special interest in participatory and collaborative art projects. I'm not going to go into much detail about their bio because we don't have that much time, but she is going to talk about Trustee Brown, who, like I said, unfortunately couldn't travel. And Trustee is an artist and an emeritus professor of ceramics at the University of Westminster, London. She taught at BA and MA and PhD programs there. And she's really a wonderful artist, and we'll hear more about her from Tessa. Claire Toomey is a British artist, researcher, and curator. She's among the most groundbreaking, influential, material-specific artists of her generation. Very excited to hear about Claire's research on a lot of. She works with museums, and it's very kind of specific. On now that we're at Bhau Daji Lad Museum, we'll get to hear about Claire's research and practice in the museum. Phoebe Cummings, she explores ceramics as a time-based medium and has absolutely delicious works. You'll love seeing those. Each of her intricately modeled work is durational, and same clay is recycled and reused in different locations. So she works with raw clay. Very exciting panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about them.
Okay, thank you so much, Madhvi, for your great introduction, and thanks very much too for the Indian Ceramics Triennale for inviting us here today, and thanks so much, Mrs. Mehta, for hosting this and for your fascinating talk, and Ruta and everyone else who I've forgotten to thank. So, as Madhvi was saying, we're the Ceramics Research Centre. You're going to hear from a few of us today. We have been thinking about different ways of working with museums for about the last 20 years now. And we've been creating stories, we've been revising histories, we've been challenging boundaries, we've been trying to provoke all sorts of questions, different ways of thinking about this field. And also, how do you get the public to engage more in this work as well? Because we're not just artists, we're not just museums, we want everybody to be involved. So yes, these are us here. So I'll move straight into Trustee Brown's work, Professor Trustee Brown. This is an example of a project she created for the Freud Museum in London. This is Sigmund Freud. He came to live in London very briefly before his death. He was a refugee from Nazi Germany, of course. And the key installation you can see on the far right there, called Sleepover, it's a detail of it there, was installed in Freud's bedroom. And the significance of these figures is that Freud had collected over 3,000 archaic figures. And for Freud, they were in relation to his development of his psychoanalytic theories. He used to have them on his desk and move them around and think about the way the mind worked. So as far as Trustee was concerned, she was thinking about, what happens when you go to sleep. It's a narrative that might be interrupted at any time. And she was also thinking about the animate and the inanimate object and how we never quite know if things might come to life sometimes when we look the other way, that these can be figures which are somehow out of our control, like our dreams can be out of control. So they're carriers of our projected emotions, these kinds of ideas. So other works that she had in the exhibition, this is the the full sleepover installation there. So these figures are about 3 foot high, and those are the Greek and Roman, Etruscan, etc. figures just in the bottom right slide there as well. And her installations took over every room in the house. So I Pray and Pray Again was in Anna Freud, Freud's daughter's bedroom. And that was a piece relating to childhood trauma. It featured several porcelain figures based on ex-voto dolls. And then in the top right slide, you see Eros. So Eros was formed like a Victorian doll. So only the outer limbs and head are substantial. The inner body, the cloth part of the body, lacking substance. And that was lying on the famous analytic couch in Freud's study. The other pieces there, my desk, that's the second one over there. That imitated the favourites, the favourite Etruscan, Greek, Roman, etc. figures that he used to arrange on his desk that I mentioned earlier. And then in the library, that's the bottom right there, the Peter Teddy Shabti. So she'd been working on her own archaic figures, which she had been shown before in the Archaeological Museum in London and also in Manchester. And she incorporated them in Freud's collection there, but the kind of very bright blue Egyptian paste really kind of glowed out of the darkness of the room. So the Freud Museum's invited different artists into the house over the years, and each of the artists has contributed very, very different stories, and collectively I think that they've managed to bring a lot of the museum alive in different ways, because there's never one story, and this was Christie's take on it. So it's a small, intimate house, but it really managed to bring it to life.
I am going to come back to that slide, but I want to talk about this one first. This is what I'm going to show you a movie in a minute. Just want to say thank you so much for inviting us, allowing us to speak with you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about agitation, because in a way, once you invite an artist into your museum, you lose control because you trust them. You bring the artist in, and then they agitate history in the way that they can see their purpose being. Interestingly enough, in Trophy, this was made at the Victorian Albert Museum, and I was invited by the curator of ceramics, Alan Graves, to make a work because he couldn't collect the work that I made, because the work I was making was unstable, it was challenging. The piece that encouraged him to invite me to make Trophy was a piece that I'd made at the Tate, which was a breaking porcelain floor as you walked across it. So, fair enough, the V&A didn't have a museum policy that says you can collect things that will break. So Alan invited me to make a work, and it's a dream project. Both Phoebe and I have been, since then, artists in residence at the V&A. So at this point I was... I'd visited the museum, so I was so much an outsider, but it was looking at the museum and the role of the museum, what it was holding. So Trophy, as you can see the work is titled, was made 17 years ago this year in December, which is only like tomorrow now, isn't it? So that's 17 years ago. And now I'm going to show you a film. And it's important to understand that 17 years ago was a long time. Right, I do a show of hands for, when you're all born, but just to put it in context, our mobile phones were used for phone calls. They were hardly picture orientated, and we'd only just really started the idea of texting, but that was quite a labour at the time. So when I made this work at the Victoria and Albert Museum, I want to transport you back 17 years because it was very unique, the first work of its kind, but you may well be familiar with these kind of narratives now, I feel. So these are the great cast courts at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I was completely thrilled when the museum said, yes, you can have those. And I was a completely unknown artist. I'd made one work, which had any notoriety around it. And so I decided that I would make a work called Trophy that people would figure out that they could steal from the V&A for 5 hours. And there's no point in me making a work. I needed to bring along with me a really powerful partner, something that had identity. And the V&A, as well as holding some of the most beautiful Bombay pottery, thank you very much, it also holds a great deal of Wedgwood. So I invited Wedgwood to be my partner. And in my studio, we made 5,000 of these, 4,000, sorry, I won't exaggerate, 4,000 of these very beautiful Jasperware birds. And the value of Wedgwood is really understood as a cultural symbol of beauty and of great desire. So when we made this exhibition, we didn't tell people what to do. We had a few people at the beginning who would take a bird, and over the 5 hours of the exhibition, all the birds were taken from the V&A. And there was this huge burden on the public in this extraordinary work that hadn't happened before, where the idea that the audience would come in, they would participate, they would take something from a museum that wasn't theirs, made them feel uneasy as they left the museum. And I'll take you back to the digital journey. We closed the exits of the museum so people could see what people were doing coming in and out of this moment. And we gave them one piece of paper, because we didn't really have much else 17 years ago, that said, please email me and tell me why you took this bird. As you can imagine, if this project was staged now, it would be a completely different understanding of communication. But at the time, for me as an artist being invited in, it allowed me to use language which hadn't been established. So we're talking 17 years ago. This work is called Trophy, and it was the very first point where I was starting to think about decolonisation. Who has the rights to own? Who has the rights to take? Who does culture belong to? And really the backdrop, it was very, very great that everybody stole a bird, but in actual fact, it's a much, much larger cultural question that we have within our museums, and an artist could address that, whereas maybe a curator couldn't 17 years ago. So there's your risk of bringing an artist in, bringing artists you trust, and there's a superpower that the artist can hold dialogues that possibly the Institute can't. And I'm going to quickly move backwards, sorry. And so the second work, I'm only talking about 2 works today, and I'm going to try and make this film work in a minute. The second film is this monumental work called Monument. And the reason I wanted to talk about this was longevity. The first piece of work I've shown you lasted 5 hours. It took 6 months to make in my studio. Brilliant partnerships. So the whole thing was loaded into 5 hours. Whereas this piece of work has been made and remade over a period of 12 years. And it's not a small undertaking. And I think that the reason I wanted to talk about this is the responsibility of artists to their work. So the work was shown most recently at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris just after the pandemic, and we made a version of Trophy. And Trophy is assembled in a way that it takes broken china. And the first time I saw this was in Stoke-on-Trent. Things that would end up in museums were on what we call in Stoke-on-Trent a picture pile, which is where all the seconds are thrown, things that aren't good enough to keep. But inside of that, you could see the beautiful Wedgwood wares just piled up, waiting to be ground to dust, which became 42% of everything that Johnson Tiles were making. So I stood into that process and I took it and I made it a cultural review of how we understand our sense of materiality around ceramics. So the very first time this work was made was at Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, and you can see I worked with a very brave curator to make a sculpture that was 10 metres tall. But inside of that, the most important thing here is that Mima is based in a deindustrialised town that suffers great poverty, and this proved to be the most popular exhibition they had ever had because of the sense of people being seen. They came into this room and they saw a narrative that they understood. And this is really interesting because it's one of the things I picked up in your wonderful museum yesterday, was how through the eyes of artists, culture can arrive and be understood through our eyes. We recognise ourselves in these places. And then the third place this was shown was at the Zuiderzee Museum in Holland. And at the Zuiderzee Museum in Holland, this work was commissioned to be there for a year. They kept it 10 years because it somehow manifested something for them about their collection, because I worked with 10,000 tiles that weren't good enough to be in the collection, but because they were Dutch heritage, they could not be disposed of. So again, the artist is the maverick. The artist is the person who can come in and use the power of their imagination and creativity to use something that's been set aside. And so after 10 years of this sculpture being kept 9 years too long, then there was the issue of deconstructing it. And I'm going to play you a video here, and I know that we're short on time, so I'm not going to say much more. So I'll play the video, and then I'll hand over to Phoebe. But the film, which I hope is going to play some sound, good, will help to explain how do you deconstruct a work, yet value its worth to the museum. "10 years ago, we started a conversation that led to the work Monument. It was a long conversation. It started with me visiting the collection, and then through discussions with the curators and the director, discovering there were these thousands of tiles in the collection, and there was a narrative to build a sculpture around. And that's how we started the commission of Monument. The urgency of Monument at the time was the collection of tiles at the Zuiderzee. It had this in-between status, and through Monument we gave that in-between status a new status of being a sculpture. And how would you tell the difference? Because they look so... but I can see the difference. Look, there's a landscape. Yeah.
Yeah, but you have smaller circles and wider circles.
2 years ago, I was invited into a conversation of how do we now care for Monument? We need to care for the building, we need to care for the sculpture. With this project, we've agreed that Monument is leaving. And so the idea that we would gift a part of this difficult Dutch history, because it was in between collections, means that somebody else goes on to care for it. The visitor needs to come and they need to choose, because that's really important. Because this object, if you're going to choose it, then you keep it and you bring your story to it and it becomes part of your life. So this was very important, that it wasn't the institute being the authority, this is the one you need to have. It was the public coming and saying, this is the one that I need because I will love it. In Monument, the golden thread, it's so important that we honour that really early discussion of the worry, are you taking care of this? And now we are. We're giving that back to the concerned public to say, we trust you, you care for it, please.
Thank you, and yeah, as my colleague says, such a pleasure to be here, and
as Madhvi said, over the past 20 years I've worked almost exclusively with raw clay, which means the pieces only ever last for a short period of time usually, often anywhere between one day to maybe a few months, depending on the exhibition. And I've worked a lot with museums. I'm not sure how many in total, but it's been a main kind of setting where I have been able to make new work. But much in the same way as Claire discussed, there's kind of challenges involved in a practice that doesn't result in a fixed kind of stable object that is permanent. And so I'm going to just talk very briefly through 3 different examples of kind of working within museums, but very specifically in relation to this challenge of collecting. So this first example are images from a residency that I did at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London in 2010. So the room that you can see is a studio space that was built in the galleries. So it's kind of right in the middle of the collections, and that opened, I think, the year before I was there. And that was really a new space within the collection that kind of allowed, in a way, the museum to kind of contain and maybe collect these sort of different forms of ceramic practice that weren't held in an object, but allow those to kind of be within the collection and for the public to kind of gain a sense of these other sorts of activities that artists might be involved in, and the kind of processes that might involve. And for me, that I was looking, very closely at the objects in the ceramic collection and the way that nature and landscape had been interpreted historically in ceramic design. And so there's a very close relationship between what I was looking at and then making in the studio without any kind of fixed plan of what the work would look like overall. So you can see the sort of floral details in the image on the left are all kind of taken from patterns that are painted or printed on objects in the collection, and then kind of, I guess, this transformation from a 2-dimensional design back into a 3-dimensional environment. So I think this kind of residency opportunity is one way of really sort of allowing these very kind of live practices within the collection, although they still, I guess in this case, they're only there temporarily, I think. With other work, this was a work that I made 2017. So the kind of thinking for this piece of work, again, it was made in the Victoria and Albert Museum as part of a craft prize in the UK. And I kind of had actually begun thinking about it when I was doing the residency and encountered a group of fragments from a table fountain in the collection, an 18th century porcelain table fountain. And that really, for me, triggered this thinking around that, is still a kind of major concern, I guess, that how materials and objects enact their own performance. And so this was a fountain. It ran with water for a few minutes each day for over a 6-month period. So over that time, the object kind of gradually eroded itself. So some of it completely dissolved, other areas were kind of more intact. And one of the challenges at the end of the exhibition was that it had to tour. And of course, I couldn't keep remaking the same work. So in this case, I took a group of fragments from the original object that were kind of in different states of deconstruction, I guess. And then I displayed those together with film footage and a photograph. And that kind of combined sort of layers of records are now formally held in the collection of the museum. So I think that's been a really long conversation with the V&A over a number of years about how to collect things that I've made. And I guess at the moment, this kind of sort of hybrid of almost archive and collection in a way of different materials layering together to kind of give some sort of picture of the original work. And that's really something that I continue to be quite focused on in my current research, and really thinking about different ways of recording sculpture. And I'm very interested in both visual and non-visual, and not only sculpture in its kind of physical materials, but also really thinking about the atmosphere of sculpture. So often maybe working with humidity or kind of written records and kind of what they can generate in a sort of imaginative space, as well as something more kind of physical or visual, like a photograph. So this final example was a project that I did with a regional museum in the UK. The clay work that you can see, I set up the exhibition, so really it was a kind of live working space. I'd begun making the sculpture and then continued at various points throughout the exhibition. And really with this exhibition, I was interested in not only me being the person that recorded the artwork, but kind of involving other perspectives in that and kind of not dictating how it should be recorded. So I invited the public to draw and write in response to the work as it kind of continued to evolve. And then at the end of the exhibition, the material was recycled, and within the museum collection, the work was kind of contained within a book that gathered together these drawn and written records. So again, kind of thinking about what different methods really of recording can offer and how they can find a way of not necessarily replacing the absent object, but find a way of kind of translating it into the future is something that I'm, continue to be really interested in. So I'll finish there.
So it's me again. It's one of my projects this time. So I have a curatorial practice. This was a project where I was responding to a discourse from the Museums Association about how can we get artists and the public to use our archives, to show that they're not just for specialists, but specialist historians, that is, but they've got a wider impact to be had there. So the Craft Studies Centre is an archive that started in 1977. It used to be at the Holborn Museum in Bath in England, but it's moved to Farnham now. My curating partner at the time, Janice West, and I were working with the Craft Studies Centre. We invited a group of artists to spend some time riffling around in the archives, trying to see what sorts of things were interesting them, what they thought they might respond to. So on the left there is a photograph that was made by Maisie Broadhead. And Maisie Broadhead had found Bernard Leach, the British potter, his study collection of pots in the archive. So these are pots he'd collected on his trips around the East, but also there was a lot of English medieval pottery there, and they were shapes that he kept to study himself, to refer to in his own work. Now, Maisie Broadhead is related to the British potter Alison Britton, and what she decided to do was to somehow kind of put together all her interests. So she got Alison Britton to pour milk from the Bernard Leach collection jug into a collection of Alison Britton's own ceramics in the style of Vermeer's Milkmaid. So it's a conglomerate of ideas, but it was kind of quite an interesting response, and hence the title Made in Britain, a bit of a pun there on Alison Britton's name. On the right is Elaine Wilson. So that's Elaine's sculpture, and it's the head of Lucy Ree. So Lucy Ree, another famous British potter, but actually she was a refugee from Nazi Germany. When she came to Britain in 1938, she brought along with her her family albums. And Elaine based her sculpture on a picture of the young Lucy Ree in Austria. This is another piece by Stephen Dixon, the potter. He again was responding to the button moulds in the collection by Lucy Ree. And he was thinking of how fragments that you often find in archives and collections can be used to tell other kinds of stories. And he put together a story using ceramic fragments, print, and other materials to produce a fictional story about an Italian soldier in the Second World War. And that was presented in an archival chest. So the public would discover the story by pulling one drawer out after another and really making the story, making the narrative themselves. And I'm just going to finish off now with a project that I worked on with Christy Brown, whose work you saw earlier. And that was called Cultural Icons, and it was for the British Ceramics Biennale. And we were responding to a collection of Staffordshire Victorian flatbacks, which are in the collection of the Potteries Museum in Stoke-on-Trent. And Staffordshire flatbacks, you've got images of them on the right-hand side there, were very cheap bits of figurative pottery made in bulk, made en masse in the potteries. And they would commemorate famous events, they would memorialize famous people, everyone from entertainers of the time to politicians to royalty and so forth. So we invited 6 artists to make contemporary flatbacks. So we asked them to make flatbacks about things that happen today, but very much in the style of the originals. They included Christy Brown, of course, and Matt Smith and Ingrid Murphy, Claire Canine, Joanna, Stephen Dixon. I think some of those have been involved in the Indian Ceramics Triennale before. So these are the ones that Christy made. They were responding to popular TV programmes at the time in the UK with animal heads, but you can still actually, if you're in the know, work out what the programmes are. Then we also asked each of the artists to produce a flatback which we could get moulds taken from. And then for 6 months leading up to the British Ceramics Biennial, there were workshops where different groups of people from the public, asylum seekers, people in recovery programs could come along, make the flatbacks, press mould them from the moulds of the artist's works. So that helped them understand how the original flatbacks were made. We had tours to the museum as well to study the flatbacks, plenty of conversations about them. Then all of the workshop participants were allowed to paint the flatbacks whatever way they wanted, which was really interesting because people came from all kinds of cultural backgrounds and brought along with them these different styles of painting or really personalised them, which again I think was in the spirit of the originals, because the original flatbacks, all the personality was given to them by the painting. So, you know, when famous people fell out of favour in Victorian times or they died, you just painted them slightly differently. You can, change the clothing and you had another line overnight. You didn't have to change the shape. So that was the idea of that. Eventually, in the final exhibition, we had a selection of the original Victorian flatbacks. We had the contemporary flatbacks made by the artists, and we also had hundreds and hundreds of flatbacks that were made by people who'd learnt these skills anew. So that's that project. So, Claire, would you like to finish off?
Maybe, if you're going to move up the conversation, I could just talk to you about the research centre while everybody grabs their seats, possibly.
Okay.
So while there's a bit of reshuffling, trying to explain that the work that we've undertaken at the Ceramics Research Centre over the last decade, specifically, even though the research centre has been running for 20 years, has had clear impact. And it's really important to our civic role in the university because we're paid by the government. It's our research centre is run by a government organisation, being the university. And in a recent review, then these 3 areas here, our work was inspected to the highest level. And it clearly proves the impact of bringing artists and curators into the museums to extend what culturally is happening in museums, but the potential to involve more people and expand the dialogue. So as much as we're looking at the role of artists, and we can talk about what possibly might happen, factually, it's really important to recognise that the role of artists has real cultural value. And for us in our research centre, it helps to propel us forward. And we're so grateful to be in dialogue with the Indian Ceramics Triennale. I'm hugely privileged to have heard Dr. Tasneem talk twice in a month, so I'm really thrilled about that as well. But it's a huge pleasure to be here. So I'll move over here now and stop talking.
Okay, thank you so much for that absolutely very speedy, it was like speed dating, you know, just knowing you guys for like 2 seconds each. But I took away a lot of exciting stuff from you all. One of the things that I found was common in a way, of course, engagement with the museum, which is why we're here, having, you know, Claire, Phoebe and Tessa all being so engaged with museums over the years, and you've engaged with almost 40 projects, you know, so that's quite incredible. But the one thing that I found that kind of struck me was how you have community engagement in each of your various projects and how you bring the community into the museum and allow them to take something back in a different way, bringing a different perspective in there. So I'm very interested in hearing more about community engagement and how you see that. You know, what do you see people bringing to the museum, because they're bringing their perspective? What are they taking back, and how are you being the one who is kind of an intervention and somebody who's facilitating this? So I'd like to hear each of your perspectives on that.
I'll take the mic to begin with, because I suppose I've got a very specific response to that. And then I'll ask Tessa and Phoebe to help me out. I think that I was artist in residence at the Tate Modern for a year. And inside of that was the question that was at the centre of my work, which is the ethics of participation. How do we do this well? How do we care for the public? How do we not extract from them in a way that doesn't return value to them? And so it's a really important dialogue for institutes to talk about, because the artists can arrive with values, but the institute is bigger. And I don't think we'd be sat here having these conversations if institutes hadn't done incredibly well in the last decade. They've really changed their understanding of what publics might be. And last month we were at the V&A hearing about new museums, and Gus Casely-Hayford spoke so well. He's the new director of the V&A East, as well as incredible museums from across the world, but talking about publics first, really, really understanding that there is a role for the public that is primary, not secondary to the collection. The collection works around the public. And so the work that I undertook with the support of the Tate, which you can imagine is a very big machine, was about understanding that balance. And I learned a great deal about what extractive practice could be, how you value. We worked with 60 specific groups from the Rhondda Valley to Plymouth and I visited those groups, so it was not just this is our gift, come and see us at the Great Tate Modern. It was about the art travelling to them. And the principle, the most important aspect of that project, as well as the thousands of people who participated in that year, was that the logo for the Tate Exchange where this happened was where art meets the public. But in all of the writing now, it's been reversed to the public meets art. So we retrained those words so that the public had a different role. And I'd say we did that 4 years ago, just in time.
Yes, I would say that I think the public are very important. I think they're the stakeholders, they're the people who actually bring life to the museum. And I think that I've always very much enjoyed curating projects which have started new conversations, leaving space for the public to add their stories, so that the work, I think then there's more of a potential for the work to become personalised by other people. It doesn't feel like an us and them situation so much, but people see themselves in it.
Yeah, and I think, I guess if I think about the way that I've worked with museums and the public, it varies a lot depending on projects. Sometimes there's like a directly maybe working together on something, but that shifts around. But I think one thing that's really important to me always, whatever the work is, there's kind of this focus on experience. And, a museum's a really special place in that way, that it's not a commercial environment, that you're kind of experiencing art in a different way usually, and that is, open to everyone in the same way is something that I feel is really important, and that kind of, and that crosses all kinds of ages, especially, children can get as much from the work as an adult. And so I think that's a kind of really important element, but also shifting this kind of sense of how we think about sculpture and objects, and moving away from this expectation that they're something that we can own and possess and maybe have that right to, but kind of focusing on them in a different way, and this awareness that, okay, this thing isn't going to last. It's about what I feel right in this very moment, and, this material can then go on to be something else. And so kind of, I guess, playing a bit with those expectations of objects and materials, and kind of trying to rethink that a little bit, that, for me sits much closer to the way we appreciate a performance and don't have those kind of requirements of it in the same way.
Yeah, I also really enjoy the fact that the artist is a disruptor. You come into a space and you change a perspective, you change the way somebody else will see the same object. And we go into museums to look at something that has been an object of another time, but you come in there and you shift the light and the perspective on it. So it would be great to see more things like this happening. And thanks to Tasneem, we have seen some exciting stuff at Bhau Daji Lad Museum in the contemporary space. So I'd like to open the floor up to some questions to Phoebe and Claire and Tessa, because I know we're running out of time. I don't want to be hogging the questions here.
It's just a short, I am just wondering, since long, that ceramic lasts so much long, and we need to be responsible for the soil which is transformed into clay. And so much people are working in ceramic, terracotta and other mediums. And then that soil is not coming back. So what you want to talk about? Because have you thought about it? Because I see that material which is discarded. Means she's giving back, or it's public art projects of they are very exciting, because I myself am public art. I do public art more. But what do you think about this way ceramic is being excavated? Like it's used like big giant is eating, many mines are being created, holes in the earth. So can we think about this like?
Would you like to answer that question? I think this question is great for Phoebe because she does not.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's kind of very much always going back to the earth, and that is one of the incredible things about clay as a material, that it's kind of this infinite possibility. And I think that we obviously over time there are traditions of using clay to make ceramics, but there's also so many other examples, especially going kind of way back of really ancient clay sculpture, so that there has always been that possibility, but maybe we've tended to use the other qualities that in its fired form it can stick around forever. For me personally, I think there's definitely something I feel more comfortable with in the fact that things, to me, when I have to fire something, which doesn't happen very often, but it kind of feels like this dead end for the material because I'm taking away that potential. So I kind of enjoy the fact that, okay, it's this for now, but then it doesn't have to stay that way. And for me, that really grew out of also a kind of personal sustainability, I guess, that it was driven by a financial necessity. I couldn't afford a kiln, or it was a way of still working with clay without needing a studio or equipment. But those, I think those things, again, it goes back to, in the talk earlier, about this kind of care for the planet, and a sort of more personal relationship to care, I think, is there. That, but I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that I'm only adding to Phoebe's voice within this. So that big pile of broken china, every time it's made, it's then put back into the system it was taken from, so it is recycled. So even though we might think that the firing is the last moment of our relationship, then all of this material goes back and is ground up and it becomes another thing. So there's a huge amount of responsibility for turning that kiln on, because your responsibility is either, one, making it precious enough that it has a right to be on this planet, or two, being responsible enough to put it back in the hands of people who can act responsibly with that. And I think that I'd like to give credit to museums who are incredibly diligent about this now. I don't think that any of us work in exhibitions which doesn't have an understanding that our planet is important first, which is a huge privilege. It's teaching us, even though this material has the potential of danger.
I don't have anything else to add, but I do think, other than, I think it's very important that that all clay artists think about the sustainability of the craft and what really, they're not just endlessly making and firing and storing and not knowing what's going to happen next.
Question.
So I wanted to ask both of you artists that there's a strong performative element in both your works. And is that part of a practice? Do you think about that as you are working? Is it part of trying to go back to Madhvi's question, the involving and engaging publics? How does that work, the performative elements in your work? Very strong in both your works.
Yeah, it's definitely for me, a really important part. But I think there's a difference in a way that I never see. Sometimes when I'm making the work, it is in a public situation, so that kind of process is exposed, but I never think of that aspect as the performance. So for me, the performance is in terms of when I step back and the material kind of takes over, and so there's, you know, this process of drying and shrinking, cracking, or, you know, sometimes I'm obviously working with water, and yeah, I guess again this focus on experience that for me sits most closely to dance and music in terms of the kind of things I'm interested in, maybe. And you know, if I go back to the fountain, that original object, this 18th century fountain, was, although it was a fired object and it still exists, it was completely made as a performance. It would have run with scented water, and there would have been the sound of the water, and you know, there's kind of all these other sensory experiences that exist around the object that I think is, you know, a kind of pure performance in some ways.
I possibly couldn't say it better than Phoebe's just said it, but the performative elements aren't an accident. They are driven right through the work, and it is the artist's responsibility to deliver those, because often Phoebe and I will work in places that don't have, we are the archive of that knowledge, and we have to bring that with us and be responsible for that. And so when the work is performing per se, it takes a lot of rehearsal and responsibility to know that in that moment you can estimate what might be unexpected, but that's nearly impossible. But you kind of rehearsed what your expectations are, because you're holding the work, you're holding the institute, and you're holding the public. And even though we've shown you beautiful works that looked very easy to make, the conversations, the gentle guidance, the knowledge you have to bring with you is really, really your superpower, because we are the travelling tradespeople. We move from institute to institute. We carry those knowledges with us. And as much as photography and film are helpful, it's our responsibility to bring that with us. And the work is performing, but I had the great privilege of working with Siobhan Davies, and working with a choreographer of that level was incredibly helpful to me to understand how she saw bodies as performative material, as well as the way we see clay as performative material. So I hope that answers your question.
Can I ask a follow-on question to that one? Is that as an artist, I find that doing something completely out of the box, like you guys have done, is not that easy to convince an institution to have raw clay causing dust, broken pots, you know, being piled up like that. How do you do that? I mean, how do you get institutions to agree to this?
Shall I start this one off, Phoebe? The institutes have usually seen something that made them want to be brave, and that's so important, because the last piece of work you've made, and I have had curators arrive from the other side of the world and go and interview all the curators I've ever worked with, just to make sure that I'm not a nutter and everything's reasonable. And few I pass every time.
But how did the first one start? Somebody had to take a believe in you, right? Yeah.
But I hope that, so I suppose the institutes have seen the thing that has been made before, so it makes them brave. Yeah. And that's really important, to encourage bravery for everybody, that this is possible. And you know, I know that Phoebe, Tessa and I work in a really responsible, even though it looks completely reckless, we have really responsible relationships, because we want success for the public. We want success for the institute, that we can just slither through this tiny gap of possibility. But I think Tess has a lovely story to tell you.
Just very, very quickly. I I worked with Claire some years ago on a project at Dr. Johnson's house. So Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson, English man of letters, the compiler of the first dictionary of the, well, first complete dictionary of the English language. So it was his tercentenary, and I was invited to go into Dr. Johnson's house with some artists to tell some stories that aren't normally told about Dr. Johnson. I invited Claire to make a piece for the Dictionary Garret, where the dictionary had been compiled. And she came up with the most wonderful idea of using blue Wedgwood dust, because Wedgwood was, in historical terms, more or less a contemporary of Dr. Johnson's. And she was going to sieve it over sheaths of paper and quills, as if suddenly the dust had fallen, quietened the space, and the scribes had left. So it was a wonderful poetic piece, and the curator said, we can't do that in a historic house. We'll be hoovering up dust forever. So Claire managed to persuade them that she would make the whole thing within a sealed tent, that they would wear paper suits, that by the time we dismantled the tent, there would be this wonderful table that was covered over. It was encased with a wooden frame and a glass top. And that when we took it down, we would do exactly the same thing and make sure that not a speck of dust got anywhere near the house. And she did it. Wow. And it worked. Oh, wow. It was fantastic. Fantastic.
That's brilliant. I think we need to end the session. So thank you so much for being here and giving us all the wonderful insights. Thank you to Bhau Daji Lad and Tasneem for hosting us, Avid for still sticking around, Abhay, he's still here, for being here and supporting us through the whole thing. We as volunteer curators do this only because we get everybody's support. So thank you very much. Thank you for being patient with all our all the things that we're doing, and thank you for the support. It wouldn't happen without the support. Thank you, Abhay, and everybody. Thank you.
We'd like to, again, like Madhvi said, thank you very much, but I'd also like to urge you to please join us in Delhi on the 19th of January next year, and we'll be really look forward to seeing you all in Delhi with us.